Welcome to Game Set Match Up, the podcast where we talk everything partnerships, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to Game Set Match Up, the podcast where we discuss all things partnerships. I'm your host, Greg Watts, and please welcome our guest today, Grant Evans, Head of Partnerships at nomupay. Grant, hello and welcome.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this one.
Thank you for joining us. Well, as a fellow podcast person, I'm keen to get some tips from you as we go. Slightly nervous, I must say. Well, look, starting with an overview and an introduction, if I may, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, your background, perhaps your current role, and a little bit more about nomupay?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Grant Evans, I'm Head of Partnerships here at nomupay, as you say, which is basically a global payments provider enabling businesses to pay and be paid effectively. So we have several different products that facilitate that. In my role, I'm Head of Partnerships mainly for the UK and the European markets within the organisation. I've been here for coming up 6 months now, but I've worked in the payments industry for 15 years across the various different roles at different providers, both in the UK and the European markets and beyond as well. So yeah, lots of interesting stories about the wonderful world of payments, which is an ever-changing and very enjoyable sector to work in.
Oh, it is. Well, we'll link to that because I know that our listeners will be really keen to hear. How have you seen nomupay's approach change since you've been there when it comes to creating partnerships? And how, I guess, have you seen partnerships evolve over the last 15 years? You started when you started. How's the whole kind of notion of creating partnerships changed since you've had a first stab?
I think, partnerships as an ecosystem, when I started in the payments industry, there weren't many people with partner manager in their job title, to be honest. And I worked in that direct to business, sales team for many years before I entered the sort of direct arena of being a partnerships manager and a partnerships leader subsequently. So I think the best people that I've encountered that have worked in partnerships generally started in direct sales. So they've worn both hats potentially. That's not to tarnish anyone that hasn't, but I think there's more opportunity now to either move from account management into partnerships or roles and departments maybe with more familiarities in terms of their day-to-day approach to being a partner manager. But there's certainly been a maturity in terms of how businesses and organizations look at partnerships as a function. I think we've still got quite a long way to go potentially. There's the PMS platforms and the likes coming in to kind of give us more of the metrics we need. I think when you talk about how nomupay look at it, obviously bringing me in as head of partnerships, probably have a head of partnerships coming in for our APAC region in the next few months as well. But putting more process in place around partnerships is probably the biggest thing here. That they had a very large direct sales team, but actually that direct sales team has been and continues to win through partnerships. In the main, there is that direct to business sort of wins going on, but quite often when I've delved into the details, there's partners associated to deals that are being won. And I've just tried to focus on a bit more structure around that over the last few months, identifying kind of the 3 tiers that we operate in, which is the traditional referral partner where they get the revenue share model. Then we have independent sales organizations which kind of resell our product, not necessarily on a fully white label basis. And then there's ISVs or integrated software vendors that fully consume our product generally via APIs and embed and monetize payments generally within their platform. So we've kind of redefined those tiers and how we approach them internally as a business, and then we'll grow out from there. But we were probably one of those very much everyone's a referral partner. You sign an agreement, you give us business, and there's so much more that can be built around that, as you know from your roles as well in the partnerships world.
Well, link to that because I'm keen to get your perspective on this. What's your definition of a business partnership, and how would you say that differs from the likes of sales?
I think it's like a two-way enablement for me. So, business partner, there has to be benefits on both sides. So I kind of see our partners as an extension of our own sales force, and they allow you to get to market a lot quicker. And platform partners in particular is an area I've really focused in the last few years, and it's that one-to-many strategy as we position it. One partner can either access 1,000 customers or sub merchants, as we would call them in my industry, for you, but also it might if you've got a team of 15, 20 salespeople internally, a platform partner might have 30, 40 salespeople plus in their own world. So if you train them and educate them the right way on your own core product that they're consuming, you've then extended your own sales force exponentially. And I think that's been something that payments companies over the years have been very, very successful with, either getting into the developer community or the ISVs that I talked about previously. And I think from the other side of the fence, what businesses look like, particularly with a payments partner, is trust is something that comes up continuously. Like, they need to trust that you have their best interests at heart. And I talk about that extension of the Salesforce monetization and expansion of your own growth and reach. It can't just be seen as you're a cash cow for us, right? Like, the fundamentals for me have always been really truly understanding the worlds and ecosystems that our partners sit in, and not just understanding payments primarily. So you need to understand your customer base in our industry can sit across dozens and dozens of different sectors, and they want you to feel like you're invested in them at a business level from their own industry point of view as well. And then you can overlay what we do in payments with that sector to the best way, with their best interests at heart. So it has to be a two-way street. And I've seen a lot of one-way street partnerships over the years, and I'm probably a bit longer in the tooth than some in terms of partnerships. So I can be a little bit more ruthless maybe around those partners that aren't operating within the values that I see a partnership should really have these days. And you have to be reactive to either try and get those partnerships back on track or make the difficult decisions, because it's all good and well having 100 partners on a piece of paper, but if they're not doing anything, or they're creating the wrong problems for you, that is when we get the difficult questions around, well, what is partnerships actually doing at the moment? What is that function achieving?
I mean, that there's a few things that you mentioned there, which I'd love to kind of pick up on, which really resonated. I guess the first is around trust. I think for me, a partnership, any relationship in life, whether it's business or personal, has to be based on trust, and that has to be the kind of the cornerstone of that relationship, of that partnership. Because unless you have trust, you can't really say what you think, do what you think, say what you feel, all of the above. And unless you have that, how can you truly get to know the other party, and how can you truly work together, collaborate together, challenge each other, disagree with each other, have conflict? And I think of a sale maybe a little bit more, I think it was Uber that said this recently on a podcast, as more of a one-time transaction. So a sale, nothing wrong with that, nothing at all wrong with that, but a sale is perhaps could be considered or thought of as a one time, I'm selling to you, done and dusted, then gone. Whereas a partnership, perhaps as you said, and that this really does strike with me, is more of a, I'm getting to know you, I'm getting to know your business, I'm understanding what your goals are, what motivates you, what's important to you, what success looks like for you, and then seeing how then perhaps what I've got might be able to support you with that, but the emphasis being on you and your goals and how we can work together. But that piece around trust really resonated.
Yeah, and I think beyond that as well, having regular touch points. There's a lot of partnerships that fall by the wayside in terms of you sign a partner agreement. Everyone thinks you do a bit of PR and the fluffy stuff front end, and it's great. We've got this exciting new partnership, but if you're not managing the key sort of success milestones that partnership's got mapped out very early on, and then continuously as well, and people leave businesses, they go on to new roles, they do new things. So you'll lose, as a partnerships leader, you'll lose good partnership managers. There's risks to that in terms of underservicing partners that, if they were doing their job really well, they were very, very close to, in terms of, are they going to try and take that partner with them? Is that partner going to follow them where they're going? Or actually, have we got protection within the team or trust within the team that actually someone else was well educated on that business as well? They know how they tick. So you've got failover contingency, and we'll make sure continuity of service exists for that partner as well. Quite often, because we have to run lean teams in the world of partnerships, sales teams might have 30, 40 people, and the partnerships function might get given 3 or 4 people to manage a huge amount of partners. That can be a challenge as well for us. So I keep fighting the good fight around additional resource for partnerships teams, certainly if partnerships is the main funnel for the sales division within an organization. But we have to be very, very agile. And, I talk to various partnership leaders, not just in my industry, and it's a common theme that resource and what we're expected to do with very limited resource can, we'll still have huge revenue targets on our departments for sure. But I guess, to flip that on its head, we also have had to do more around attribution of revenue and highlighting where we're actually getting that revenue from the partner ecosystem and network, and having good PRMs partner management system, PMS, is having good Salesforce integrations to make sure that we're tagging partner deals properly, and you can funnel it all the way back to the partnerships team, regardless of how that salesperson's tagged it, right? Don't lose revenue anywhere in that funnel, right? Because the ultimate thing that your C-suite cares about when they're looking at partnerships function is it driving revenue for us as a business? There's other benefits in terms of some of the other stuff we can do from partnerships as brand plays and things like that, but ultimately, certainly in my industry, it will always come back to revenue as well, and you have to be able to highlight that the same way that a direct sales team would do for the the CCO, the CRO, whatever it might be.
Well, here's a radical thought, and perhaps a little controversial. Why not have partnerships just run the whole commercial function? And but I do get it though. I get, sales has been around for as long as the dinosaurs, and so sales, people get sales, right? People get that sales generates money. Partnerships, it's still an emerging new thing. As frustrating as it might be for people like us, it still is frustrating, and I get that we have to kind of prove our worth and get the stripes and all of that. But but I am seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing, and I know that you're seeing as well, lots of organizations do what I just perhaps a little controversially suggested, is actually having just a commercial function, of which partnerships takes perhaps a leading role, and then you've got your hunters and your BDRs and your SDRs and all of those. Then you've got your your in life people, and you've got your kickoff people, but you've got people mapped across the entire life cycle of that commercial relationship, from the initial hunting and sourcing and finding through to the onboarding and in life growth, all of the above, but just under all one kind of group.
I think it's starting to happen. I think you're going from having a head of sales and a head of partnerships working together to having a head of sales and partnerships as one job title, right? And that evolution has started to happen in our industry as well. It's just how you then meld those two divisions together, and how you attribute revenue. I think the interesting thing in our space again is you'll have a revenue share with the partner, and then the partner manager feeds it into the salesperson, so their actual total revenue contribution is X, but their commissionable revenue can be far, far less as well, because partner strips some revenue out, the BD is stripped some revenue out, and then the partner manager, who's probably brought that partner in, set everything up, started to filter leads in, is left with very little. So again, something I thought about in a previous role was, do we pivot the revenue to be more bonus based for the partner managers, like you'd have with an account management function? It's not always been that way in our industry, but that's probably a better structure linked to overall partner portfolio performance. And it is quite variable from one company to the next within the payments ecosystem. But I do agree. I feel like, meld the two together, the two departments work quite closely together anyway. And that evolution probably is starting to come into more sectors.
It definitely feels, if nothing else, that there is more of a focus, much more of a focus on developing a long-term, commercially viable relationship with a partner rather than a one-off sale. And so it's not massive leap to then think about how the organization then wraps itself around that. If it's moving from a one-off sale, and there's a clue in the name sale, to perhaps a longer-term partnership approach, then it will kind of start to evolve, I guess. But it's interesting watching. But kind of linked to that, I guess, and for all the budding partnerships people out there, what advice would you give to your younger self starting out? And you kind of touched on this a moment ago. Perhaps the do's and the don'ts of partnership creation and development.
Yeah, and I think it does stem back to something I touched on a minute ago, and it's making sure you can always evidence the value of what you're doing, because we do a lot of work in the shadows that probably goes unnoticed. Direct salesperson is, how many deals have you signed this month? How much revenue is generated off the back of that? When you look at like platform partners in particular, and I'm not saying that enterprise direct customers don't take sometimes 18, 24 plus months. You have RFPs to go through, but every partnership deal quite often is a tender process, right? Where they've gone to market, and I'd say the sales cycle for partnerships, from I guess pitching to signing to onboarding to kind of working out how you're launching the partnership and scaling it, is probably a little bit slower in terms of the actual time to revenue than you'd get with a direct end customer. So, one of my former managers from many moons ago, she used to talk about, that this sort of clock analogy, where you would have deals in every quarter of the clock, and making sure that you're not too heavily loaded up in one particular segment. And I think partnerships managers have to very much live by that mantra and think about the types of partners that you've got within your portfolio, because you'll always have some of those slower burn ones that take 2-3 years, or you sign them and it takes them another 18 months to re-platform from where they were previously. So you do need a nice mixture of different revenue speed, I guess, partners within your portfolio. I think I'm probably been guilty of that, as even in my direct sales team days, of probably having too many types of a certain customer in one of those pillars and not enough in another. So making sure you're managing that, and managing up really well, is really, really paramount to success. You have to make sure the people that are looking down at the partnerships department and assessing that and trying to determine with their own metrics, don't let them decide the metrics that are partnership success. You really need to show them what you're doing, how you're doing it, and where the revenue that's attributable to that actually exists as well. So managing up is, a massive thing in partnerships, to make sure that you're not getting the difficult questions. You're presenting that data before those difficult questions come around. Well, we did launch this partnership, why has nothing happened with it? Make sure you always have an answer for those questions, right? Because there's always a reason, but sometimes things can go by the wayside, and you've done the fluffy PR stuff that I talked about, and then people expect, right, when you put those things up in flashing lights, people expect delivery off the back of it.
But I guess once again, it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, which is when you start off in a partnership, one of the first things that you do is understand the objectives of your partner, and then you build out a plan together on that, of what you're going to deliver and what they're going to deliver, and it's this joint plan that you both signed up to, and that then gets signed off, if you like, with people higher within the organizations, and so that before a partnership has even started or been activated, everyone within both organizations have signed off on them. So it shouldn't come as any shock to people as you're tracking those things. Obviously you've got to achieve them, but taking the time, I suppose, up front to make sure everyone is clear on what we've achieved, as opposed to, there's nothing more annoying than halfway down when some person, I was going to say something else, but some person within the organization might say, well, what about this, and then at that point you're able to say, well, actually that's not what we agreed. We can look at it, absolutely, but it's not what we agreed for this particular phase or quarter or whatever it might be. But it allows, I guess, for you to say, actually, well, this is what we're tracking against and what we're measuring.
Yeah, I think, again, as a leader within a partnerships ecosystem, making sure your team aren't letting things like QBRs slip, and that can be partner driven, but it can also be something that a PM with too many partners gets a bit sloppy with, and then 3 months becomes 6 months, becomes 9 months, and then you can ask them, well, what is that partner working on at this moment in time? Well, I don't know, because I've not seen them for 9 months, and they're not really that bothered about, and that's something that you have to be very, very on top of. I think I'm quite rigid on QBRs and that partner engagement, and not just telling them what you're doing, but find out what their pain points are in their industry. Let them tell you before you tell them, is one of those mantras that I always live by. Ask, what are your problems? What are your challenges? Don't come in, and this is something, again, in the payments industry I've seen far too often, where payments provider X comes in and goes, we've got this, and this shiny stuff, and this will do this, and this will drive this for you. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. You've not even asked us what we do at the moment, what problems we're facing in our market, and where payments maybe overlaps with that. And it's a common pitfall that I've seen far too many times. So let the partner speak first, always, and very much don't let those QBRs slip. And it's not to say some of them will prefer over the phone, some of them prefer in person, but some of the best PMs I've ever had in my teams have built such close relationships with their partners. They trust them implicitly. They know them on a personal level as well as a professional level. And again, I'm not saying every partner's going to want to be your mate and go out for dinner with you and know the name of your kids, but again, some of the most successful PMs that I've had have been at that sort of level, at least with certain key stakeholders within their partners, right? The certain individuals where they've built very, very strong relationships with them, and they become massive assets to your organization then, because they're a gatekeeper to your competitors taking those partners away from you effectively.
Well, again, it's built on trust, and people like buying from people, and people like working with people, and so just being normal and decent, it doesn't come as any surprise when actually they enjoy working with you, which I always find quite interesting as well. Don't I've heard I'm not sure whether we can say this on the podcast, but don't be a D something asterisk CK is often a phrase which I can't, not often I should say, is a phrase I've heard, which I think is interesting. But moving on, but having created partnerships for a big chunk of your career, and this kind of comes back to the previous question. What are your top tips when it comes to creating high-performing teams and winning cultures? And you've talked about how you've managed your PMs and how you managed your teams and how you've led them. What would be some of your pieces of advice around creating high-performing cultures?
Yeah, I've lent in probably to subject matter experts within the teams that I've had, and you
Mm,
kind of have a failover with that. So you might have two people straddling two specific sector verticals and learning them implicitly, sort of inside out. And we had a lot of success in my prior company within the financial services industry with that, and that's more nuanced. There's various offshoots of financial services into subsectors, but finding individuals that have that passion for an industry outside their own industry that they're selling as well, because there are some very boring sectors to sell into, obviously, like I can't deny that, but find that person that, if someone might find retail a lot more exciting than someone
yeah,
else, right? So you want people to have a passion about the sectors that they're selling into for platform partners, whatever it might be, ecosystem partners. So I've honed into that quite heavily, and kind of that hunter versus farmer thing that you talked about earlier as well is a very, very big one for me,
mm,
because you have individuals that just have no interest in, either they've done direct selling and it wasn't for them, so they've moved into what they feel is a completely different type of selling in terms of partnership land, but there is still very much a hunter angle to new business partnerships. So I've had to kind of find those people in my team and have open conversations, with people
mm,
throughout my time in partnership management, where I've said to them, like, I've asked them first, are you a hunter or a farmer? What camp would you put yourself in? And sometimes people that were in hunter roles have said, look, I think, Grant, I'm actually more in the farmer camp, and I've agreed with them. But then as a manager, I've also had someone say, I enjoy the hunting more, but I've had to say to them, for
yeah,
me, you're just not a hunter. Sorry, everything I see in your attributes and your skill set and how you handle yourself is that you are the perfect farmer. I know you might want to be that hunter, but actually, instinctively, as a manager, it's for me to kind of establish and learn your traits and behaviors, and where I think you're going to be the most successful. So having that balanced team that splits into those two camps is, very important, but also knowing the right time to split your team or to scale up one of those two halves of that function more than the other. Obviously, no point having loads of farmers if you've got hardly any partners to manage, but you also don't want too many hunters off the bat. So asking for headcount at the right time as your partner ecosystem grows and develops is really, really important as well.
I was just thinking, actually, I use the term hunter and farmer, and obviously it's a very well known expression, but I wonder whether there's a nuanced kind of preference amongst people, whether they would prefer to be some kind of hunter because maybe, the image of this might be going too much into psychology, but a hunter might be perceived as being, big,
Uh,
strong, and, alpha and all that kind of stuff. And
well, I
actually,
did a AI post on it a few months
right,
ago, and it did create like an old guy with a beard as the farmer, and it created like
yeah,
Tarzan as the
yeah.
hunter. So I can understand that paradox.
Yeah, so maybe there's an opportunity for us to kind of rewrite those things, because we both obviously they're equally as important for different reasons, but there could be connotations. And
I
I'm
mean, I've called it, partner acquisition is kind of what I call
yeah,
the
that's
hunter side of
better.
that historically.
Yeah,
So I've recruited a role as partner acquisition, and
yeah,
then we got a load of people that weren't even in partnerships because they saw the word acquisition from different sectors applying for the job. So it caused a hell of a lot of confusion. But in my mind, you could have partner acquisition or something, maybe not that is partner acquisition, because I've been down that rabbit hole, and like I said, I got a lot of the wrong applicants for the job.
it's
But partner
interesting.
acquisition and partner account management maybe is probably
It is.
the two buckets.
Isn't it interesting how people are so attached to titles? I mean, probably us included to some extent as well after all these years, but actually the role is still the same. But look, to round us off, one last question, if I may. What do you see the future holding for businesses when it comes to creating partnerships with each other? And what, if anything, will you and nomupay be doing differently?
I think for me, there's there's something we talk about an awful lot, is like build or buy, and there's
Yeah.
kind of an evolution with partnerships around that as well, where we have, as an industry, it's always been very competitive, but there's a lot more of kind of like the frenemy ecosystem developing, as I would call it, where you've got payments companies partnering B2B with other payments companies because they've decided to buy rather than build, and that can maybe lead to an acquisition further down the road. But I feel like that's kind of the B2B side. From like the open market point of view, with partners that we deal with, embedded payments is kind of the future. There's more companies that have partnered with payments companies like Touch historically, and that's created maybe some bad processes in terms of the funnels and the flows for getting their customers live with a payment ecosystem. So more companies now are looking to us from an API point of view, from an AI point of view. How do I get better data from my payment provider for my end customers? How do I set my end customers live quicker with a payments platform? So the evolution is maybe more to embedded finance and embedded payments beyond that as well, is where I'm seeing as an evolution, where the payment provider and the partner in question sits very much behind the curtain. And it's been more historically, we've partnered with X payments provider, they will give you this, this, and this to the open market. Now it's, what is our product stack? And payments is just something that's on that list. You don't even have to name the payments company that you're using. And that's not just limited to integrated platform providers or those more sort of technology focused ones, even smaller companies that maybe would have been more in that, what I call that independent sales organization, market historically. They don't want anyone to know necessarily they're using nomupay, and we're very happy to just be the vessel, the facilitator for that. We're not fussed about having our name up in lights, and we can operate in the shadows, grow our book and our portfolio very, very significantly by being, very important cog in the wheel for some of these organizations. But we don't need to be front and center. We just need to be as efficient as we possibly can, and do things differently to the legacy players in the market. We're lucky that we're newer to the market. It's always easy when you're new, you have a new product, you're nimble, and you haven't got loads of legacy technology sort of slowing you down. So you have to strike when the iron's hot and try and find those problems that I talked about previously within the partner ecosystem that the other companies maybe have with legacy providers.
Well, must say, thank you very, 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 very much. That was absolutely brilliant for a whole host of reasons. Some incredible advice and tips. Thank you very much for joining us on Game Set Matchup, and perhaps you can come back in the next few months and we can kind of reflect on how partnerships has evolved and whether partnerships has taken over other parts of organizations. Well, look, Grant Evans, nomupay, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Take care. All the best.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for joining this week's Game Set Matchup. Tune in to hear more about the need to knows and the do's and don'ts when it comes to creating successful business partnerships.